So when it comes to my favorite fights in JoJo's, there are a couple. Off the top of my head, Dio's World, the Wonder of You arc, Gyro and Johnny versus Funny Valentine, and a very odd one I don't think a lot of people see very often, but I love saying, Polnareff, Avdol, and Iggy versus Vanilla Ice, but it can just be summarized as Polnareff versus Vanilla Ice, as that's what it really just boils down to at the very end of the fight. Why I find the fight so fascinating and even so high in my top 5 fights in JoJo is because what it represents for Polnareff, the Stardust Crusaders, and after part 3 in general, as it's just a really good fight that has so much emotional weight behind it, especially for Polnareff, who genuinely has a finished character arc after this fight. Well, technically it finishes after defeating Dio, but for a majority of it, this is where it ends for him, and it ends poetically for a character a lot of people don't like for several reasons, but of course I'm talking about it and I don't hold those opinions, so I hope you enjoy and see where I'm coming from. Okay, I think this is where I do this thing. Hello, Metas from the future here. I have an announcement. I'm getting really close to 100k, so I thought, for once, I might do something a bit special for the channel, and I have now officially made some merch with the Metas character on the thing. I don't really know how to advertise. This is all kind of new to me, but yeah, I've made some sweaters, some hats, some beanies, baseball cap that my brother really wanted. Overall, it's just some simple merch that I thought I designed myself and a bit of the help with my brother, and it's here for the channel for everybody to sport it if you want to. I think it's all fairly cool looking. I've worn most of it for the past week or so. It's just really cool having my face on something that I really enjoy, that I drew. So I thought you guys might want some, so link down below. You don't have to, you're not obligated or anything. Just watching this video and any future videos or any videos on my channel is good enough for me, but if you do want to support the channel a little bit more, of course you can buy a shirt, hat, beanie, etc. I would also like to say thank you for almost reaching 100k, by the way. That's kind of a major accomplishment for me, so this is kind of just all a giant celebration. So again, thank you. Back to the video. So I'm going to start off with a generalization of Polnareff's character that I think a lot of people have that should look past that when coming to this fight with Vanilla Ice, as I think by the end of it, it should change. Polnareff can be viewed as the comic relief of the extremely serious Stardust Crusaders group, as for a majority of his screen time before the Polnareff versus Vanilla Ice fight, he is doing something funny or comical at times. And at others, he is playing a very serious role with the rest of the group fighting off the stand villains of part 3, or developing the plot in some major way, not including his actual revenge arc within the early parts of part 3, which leads some people into thinking, screw Polnareff, why is he taking up so much screen time? This is annoying. Then he gets his whole stand fight fighting Jay Guile, which I think a lot of people just either don't like, or where a lot of people thought, okay, now it's gonna end, now he's not gonna show up on screen anymore, it's finally over. And of course that doesn't happen, and he still has fights after that and is still used as comic relief at some moments, but not as heavily it was in early part 3. Then we get introduced to Iggy, and now Polnareff and Iggy have this kind of, I would describe it as a love-hate relationship, sibling rivalry. Overall, it's just used for jokes, as now fart jokes are their thing between the two. And up until this point, in the near ending of part 3, Polnareff's character can be generalized as the funny man, who can participate in stand fights from time to time. Note, that's not how I see Polnareff. That's what I think a lot of people overall see Polnareff like, as I'm not a casual fan by any degrees of the measurement. In some ways, I would compare Polnareff to Ray from Fist of the North Star, a character bent on revenge, but is also used by the author for other things, either character exposition or to help in a pretty important fight. That's how I view Polnareff. I just never found him annoying or just weird, I guess. And especially during this fight and after, Polnareff has really changed for me into this character that I just feel for. It's just really sad how this fight ends, and man, it tugs at the heartstrings just a little bit. And at the start of the fight, there is some pretty dark humor. As the boys prepare to go inside to rescue the Joestars and Kakyoin, they make a pretty funny bet to buy dinner for each other if Avdol survives, as the joke here is Avdol faked his death once before. The boys eventually get into Dio's mansion and shortly thereafter beat Kenny G. From the looks of it, it looks like the guys are going to eventually find the Joestars and Kakyoin pretty easily if all they have to do is fight Kenny G, who was literally fodder. And then Avdol has to read the wall, and he reads it, and then shortly thereafter, he gets brutally but swiftly one-shotted by Vanilla Ice, but pushing Iggy and Polnareff away just in time, contradicting how you should only worry about yourself in this fight, which he doesn't really stick through with and cares about the others more than himself. From this point onward, the fight becomes extremely terrifying, is the best way I would like to describe it, as Polnareff and Iggy have no fucking clue what to do against Vanilla Ice from this point onward. Emotions are extremely high at the current point in time, as you're fighting a black hole that, if anything comes in contact with, will completely disintegrate whatever just came in contact with it. In this case, mostly Stone and Avdol's body. Polnareff is currently trying to cope with the death of Avdol, but at the same time trying to fight Vanilla Ice, who at this point just seems impossible to defeat. And this idea keeps running through Polnareff's head of why. Why did Avdol save me when he said he wouldn't save me? Why? Then he starts to make up excuses in his mind, like he just should have stayed dead in India. Why did he have to come back into my life and to feel these emotions again, feeling for Avdol after his death, which now isn't a fake out. So now it's just all this weight is now bearing on Polnareff's shoulders while he's fighting something he can't literally beat. The juxtaposition of Polnareff, the funny man, the guy who helps the cast do things and is overall the glue that holds the Stardust Crusaders together, is now flipped on his ass and is now trying to cope with the death of his friend for reals this time, fighting something, well, he's quite frankly not prepared to fight for. He can't do shit against Vanilla Ice right now. It just puts a lot of weight on the viewer's shoulders, and it's just like, wow, this is like serious this time. Like, there's no jokes here. This isn't Whole Horse fighting Avdol. There's no shenanigans involving Jay Guile. No, like, it's like, you're going to die here if you fuck up. But thankfully, Iggy's there to help. Kind of. While he does use his sand to construct illusions of Dio to trick Vanilla Ice, shortly thereafter gets his shit rocked in by Vanilla Ice pretty bad, putting the dog near death. On the bright side, Polnareff did figure out that Vanilla Ice has a bit of a temper, allowing Polnareff to get a slight advantage over him, but it was at a very huge cost. Polnareff thankfully actually gets close enough to Vanilla Ice to actually do a critical wounding move. For right now, it seems like there is a bit of hope for Iggy and Polnareff, until we're reminded that Vanilla Ice is a vampire, and yeah, that light slowly fades away from Polnareff's eyes as he realizes, I'm gonna die. The next handful of pages are absolute chaos. Vanilla Ice is just completely destroying the building around them, hoping to clip Polnareff, and luckily, he does clip Polnareff a lot during this moment of the fight. And the only thing Polnareff can do at the current moment is retreat, but sadly gets stuck with Vanilla Ice as he circles around him, as he potentially is going to die very, very soon. With Iggy, as Iggy literally can't do anything at the current moment in time. But in a really weird moment, but I think it fits pretty well, is Polnareff asks himself a question. How can he dodge this attack with his injured leg? And he gives himself 3 choices. Number 1, his handsome self will suddenly come up with an idea to counter his attack. Pretty good choice. Number 2, his friends will come in and save the day for him. Very shonen of you, Polnareff. And number 3, I won't be able to dodge it. Life is cruel. And sadly enough, Polnareff ends up finding out that answer 3 is the correct one. He can't dodge this. There is quite literally no way out of this. He has no options. Vanilla Ice is just too powerful for Polnareff. Polnareff at this moment accepts his death, but he knows if he at least saves Iggy, there is a fighting chance for the others to defeat Dio and Vanilla Ice. He will do the same thing Avdol did for him. But of course, Iggy does not want to do this, as Iggy rarely ever listens, and it is in Iggy's nature to be stubborn and not do what is told of him. But of course, Polnareff fights back and says, no, live, damn it. With death staring at his back, he looks at Iggy and says, life isn't always kind. And I guess the answer was number 3. And he says later to Iggy, Vanilla Ice is at the doorstep of victory, but that Boston Terrier still doesn't know how to listen, even facing death itself, and saves Polnareff before Vanilla Ice can actually finish him off. In this last heroic act, Iggy has died, the same as Avdol trying to protect Polnareff. Why I think this scene hits a lot for me is because it doesn't play out stereotypical. You think Jojo and friends are going to come in through the door and save Polnareff and Iggy and beat the shit out of Vanilla Ice, but that doesn't happen. It's actually the quite literal opposite. Iggy is the one that saves Polnareff, but at a cost. That cost being his own life. In the ending half of Part 3 Stardust Crusaders, there is this overall central theme of sacrificing to defeat Dio. And Iggy and Avdol kind of set this up because there's no way everybody's gonna come out of this thing alive. There's just no way. It's Dio. Dio has killed so many people, and Dio's acolytes have killed so many people. This is a thing that happens all the time in JoJo's. And here, I think it's done incredibly well because it's just like this over-encumbering shroud of darkness is just here. But there's that little bit of hope just dangling in the air, and it's just amazing right here because what happens after, it's like, oh shit. Polnareff now, thanks to Iggy's sacrifice, and I would even say to a further extent Avdol's sacrifice, now has the tactical advantage over Vanilla Ice, and comes from up top, plunging his rapier into Vanilla Ice's skull, snapping it 180 degrees backwards. The main reason why I wanted to talk about this fight was, of course, it's the fight itself as it's cool, but this panel work right here, where he just snaps his neck, is so emotional. There's been very few times in my life where I viewed art and I just like say, hey, it's just, you know, cool looking. But in this instance, there's so much weight behind that neck snapping. It just hits me at a certain level that I just need to express it in some type of way. And thank God I have a YouTube channel, because I just had to say this to myself constantly. I'd go crazy. But the fact that he just gets angry and just snaps his neck out of the sheer violence of it, out of his death of his friends, is just amazing. I love this part of this fight. It just shows all the efforts of his friend's death did mean something at the very end of it. And just to add the cherry on top, Polnareff finally realizes something about Iggy. Up until this point, him and Iggy have been kind of like on neutral ground. They didn't really like each other, but they kind of just had to deal with each other. But Polnareff realizes in this moment, it's his pride. Iggy's pride as a dog is what saved him, and why Iggy never really kind of talked to the group. But now, in his death, Polnareff finally understands him, and is most likely the only person to actually understand Iggy. And if that's actually the case, and Polnareff's the only person ever to actually understand Iggy, kind of makes the scene a lot sadder in hindsight. But the fight isn't over yet. But thankfully, Polnareff has now got I think a rage boost or either a resolve amp, and proceeds to mop the floor with Vanilla Ice. Like, it's not even fair at this point. He is pissed. And thankfully, up until this point, Polnareff finally figures out that Vanilla Ice is a vampire. Like I said previously, that small bit of hope in a room of black has now brightened up the room so much that there is no darkness in the room anymore. Polnareff has Vanilla Ice dead to rights. And in the most disrespectful gangster ass move I have ever seen, he just gets this man close enough to him and just knocks him over into the sunlight. He doesn't barrage him with his stand, he doesn't yell at him, he doesn't do nothing. He just says go to hell and just hits him, ending Vanilla Ice's life. And while the fight is over now and Polnareff has won, this is where the tears begin to flow, as the next few pages are probably some of the best reactions to death in all of JoJo, especially in the anime, as the leitmotif that does go off with the Iggy death theme hits here. And in my case, I have always cried because it just hits correctly. It, like, the ending to this fight with the ghosts of Iggy and Avdol, Polnareff just reacting to them, is just, it's heartwarming and a bit sour and sweet. Like, there's so many feelings I could describe here, but I guess to simplify my point, it's sad, but also a bit hopeful, because Polnareff has survived this, and now Jojo and friends can now regroup and they can now fight Dio, which will eventually lead to a better world, and Dio does eventually get defeated. But just the sacrifice here just really mattered in the end, and I appreciate that a lot from a viewer's perspective. And this fight is overall just amazing, man. And the fact that Polnareff weeps at the very end for both of his friends' deaths, just amazing. That's all I have to say. I think the best way you can describe how you see Polnareff before this fight and after is, one time I read a YouTube comment that basically said that when they first saw Polnareff for the majority of part 3, he was just a clown. He was just the guy who had a revenge plot and was the glue that holds the team together by making jokes and was kind of the comic relief. After this fight, though, their opinion had changed into something of, he's so much more important once you look past the surface level, is the best way I can summarize what they said very briefly. Polnareff is the character that personifies the art of revenge. He might lose something in life, but I will always bet on the fact that he will always take something back from life. And while this is a bit of headcanon on my part, I genuinely feel like due to the events of this fight alone, Polnareff ends up trying to be the hero after part 3 thanks to the showings of the events in part 5, Golden Wind. As the sacrifices of these friends must mean something for Polnareff to keep on pushing forward to make the world a better place. As that is his conclusion to his story, to be a sacrificial hero.
Look how they massacred my boy.
And that idea even stems to Turtle Polnareff, but that might be a little bit too different for this video, so I might talk about it for another day. Overall, what I would have to say for this fight being one of my favorites, it's just the pacing, the themes of it. The overall fight itself is super, super interesting, as Polnareff and Iggy, for the majority of it, are on the losing side because of how terrifying Vanilla Ice is as a stand user and as a vampire. And the pacing of this fight is really good for a JoJo fight because sometimes they're a bit too long or a bit too short, but here I feel is just perfect. Well, that's going to be the end of the video. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Should I be calling it X now or keep saying Twitter? I don't know. Stay hydrated. I'll see you next time. Now I'm conflicted.